probably 70% of the population is in need of emergency humanitarian food assistance. And the troops pulled out. Taliban very quickly took control again, as you just reported. International assets were frozen, and the economy plunged into chaos. Very little cash in the systems. Banks have been largely frozen since then. People unable to get money out, move money around. But recognize that this came in the midst of we're now entering the third year of drought. So it would have been a very difficult time for Afghans in any case. But now we've got some of the most acute food insecurity in the world. As you just mentioned, probably 70% of the population is in need of emergency humanitarian food assistance. And, people are going to have coming into the winter now. It's cold today even. And in the highlands, in particular mountainous areas of Afghanistan, it's likely to hit probably -20, -25 some point through this winter. They don't have enough to keep warm. They don't have enough to feed themselves. And, snow will blanket the countryside in many areas, making it very difficult to access resources such as markets, clinics, get to school, all those things. It's going to be very difficult going ahead.
And how bitter, Charles Davy, is an Afghan winter?
It's really, really cold. Typically in the highlands there's a lot of snow, but unfortunately in the past 2 years there's been little, hence the droughts that have come. But it doesn't mean that it's not freezing cold. People have little electricity, little ability to heat their house, and they don't have modern clothing to keep warm with, and it gets very, very cold, especially for the very young and for the very old, who suffer considerably. I say, without enough calories in their system, it's going to be a very difficult winter ahead.
And so where does Afghan Aid come in? Because lots of people who observed the withdrawal of Western forces and the collapse of that regime last year will think, well, there's been a complete sort of humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. It's sort of become a pariah state to a large extent, cut off from the West. Where does Afghan Aid, the Times' and Sunday Times' chosen charity this year, come in? What do you do?
Well, since last year, we've really focused on our humanitarian assistance. So we've assisted probably close to 1.6 million in the past year, and that's largely been food distributions, cash assistance, but also winterization assistance, blankets and fuel for heating homes. I think in total we've delivered something like 340,000 food packages to families, and we've been working with them as well to really try and enable them to come out of this crisis when it ends. Obviously, the only way to get out of a food insecurity crisis is to start growing your own food. That means hitting the seasons right and being able to plant seeds, harvest crops when the time comes. But at the moment, it's looking as though, it's going to be another drought year, and it's going to be very difficult this coming year. I say we want to enable the system so that they can grow more when the time comes.
In a sort of post-NATO withdrawal Afghanistan, given what that's meant for the country's international standing, the ease of accessing it, as you say, the flow of money in and out of the country, and security, how much more difficult has your work become?
Let's say it's not become necessarily more difficult, it's changed. Certainly the movement of money into the country and around the country is much more challenging, and we're having to use traditional systems of the Hawala, which actually working very well, but adjusting to that was quite a change. Also, I think when we talk about accessing the beneficiaries, the people that we're working with, that has on the whole improved. Obviously, we've got peace now across the country, and we're able to reach places that were formerly contested between the Taliban and government forces or international forces. So that is an improved aspect of it. But we're still trying to adjust to working with a new government, new administrations, and they're still struggling, I think, to get consistent systems in place across the country. So you know, one thing that's allowed in one area is not allowed in another, and we find those restrictions. We've got to be continually on our toes, make sure our staff are well informed about what the local circumstances are, what they can and can't do, and who they need to inform and who not. So it's really learning to work within a new system. That could be the case in many situations, but it's just now it's just making that transition from what we knew to something that is somewhat different now. But I say the big thing for us is the engagement of our female staff. For the most part, they're able to work and able to reach women and children across their work areas. But then there's occasions when there's limitations placed on their travel, limitations placed on the way in which they must dress and meetings that they can engage with and things. So again, it's constantly keeps us on our toes. We're constantly having to adapt.
You were an MP in Afghanistan. You're the first female deputy speaker of the Afghan parliament, a real milestone there. When you look at what's happened since, what's your assessment of the situation for women now in the country?
Well, I can't believe that after all those hard works and struggle by the people of Afghanistan and by our allies, we went back to scratch. We are now talking and struggling around some of these core issues. In fact, today I attended a big conference organized by a Muslim majority country about girls' education in Afghanistan, where we know women's fundamental rights are being denied. And what's happening in Afghanistan does not happen anywhere in the world in terms of human rights. Taliban do not allow girls secondary education. They don't let women in public sphere. They have a good division of labor. They want the international community to feed the people of Afghanistan. And they want their own so-called income tax that they collect to go to the Taliban salary. So it's a deteriorating situation. It's not only one aspect of it, that humanitarian crisis, 40 million people are in poverty. And in a rich country, Afghanistan is a rich country in natural resources, but yet we're the poor nation. But also, the humanitarian catastrophe is not the only catastrophe. The human rights catastrophe is actually more than that, and a lack of legitimate government. In fact, this Taliban de facto power is not called government. By the UN definition, it's called de facto authority. So lack of legitimate government, which is accountable to the people, makes the situation even worse.
Are you in regular contact still with friends and family back in Afghanistan? Obviously, you're in Bali currently for a conference. But what do your friends and family who are still in Afghanistan say about the state of the country compared to when NATO withdrew and the Taliban returned? What are the differences they note in what it's like to live there?
Well, I have my offices in 4 provinces with whom constantly I'm in contact. We have schools.
Fawzia's line has just frozen there. We'll try and get her back. We've got Fawzia back. Sorry, Fawzia, you were just saying how your friends and family in Afghanistan and your colleagues have observed big differences in what life is like. Just remind us of those, because we lost you momentarily.
Yeah, I was just saying that I have offices in 4 provinces.
Yes.
Can you?
I can hear you loud and clear. Carry on.
In 4 provinces and schools.
Fawzia Kufi's line isn't great there, so let's try and stabilise that. I think we've still got Charles Davy, Managing Director of Afghan Aid, on the line. Charles, it's Fawzia's story too. It will be a common one, won't it? You have a generation of Afghan politicians, particularly women, who were allowed to finally to play an active role in public life and participate fully. In Fawzia's case, very articulate, rose to become Deputy Speaker of the Afghan Parliament, playing a big role in civil society, and then overnight the rug has been pulled from under them.
Yeah, difficult adjustment to go through. I think whether you're been a parliamentarian or you've been a professional woman, a working woman. I think students, it's going through this adjustment, trying to deal with it. I think is a very, very difficult time for people.
The big dilemma, Charles, for Afghanistan as allies, or Afghanistan's erstwhile allies, rather, the Western countries like Britain, the countries who are involved in the NATO invasion and occupation, and the regime stabilising the old regime. The dilemma there is whether to send large amounts of aid in and stabilise Afghanistan's economy. But the risk there, obviously, is that you've got the humanitarian concerns on one hand, and on the other, the big risk is you prop up a regime you don't see as legitimate, and you inadvertently strengthen the Taliban. What is that a calculation Western governments are struggling with?
I think yes, certainly they're struggling with it. But clearly, the answer to not wanting to support the Taliban is certainly not to allow the people of Afghanistan to starve. I think there's been a large amount of international assistance, humanitarian assistance, that's come in over the past year, but we really do need to move to a different type of engagement where we are able to support ordinary people to, I say, grow their own food, but make their own livings, and that might mean some level of engagement with the Taliban, with the new government.
Well,
I think we have to figure this one out. It's a difficult situation, but can't go on the way it is.